Ok. Muy bien, buenos días. Gracias por estar aquí. Es para nosotros, en el Departamento de Ciencias de la Comunicación de la Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana, un placer recibir a la profesora Janet Wasko, profesora de la Universidad de Oregón, quien, entre otras actividades, es la directora de la Asociación Internacional para la Investigación en Comunicación y Medios, y que el día de hoy nos acompaña para compartir con nosotros sus experiencias respecto al estudio de la compañía Disney. En particular, nos señalará la importancia de estudiar críticamente a esta compañía y lo hará, digamos, en esta primera instancia como una primera presentación magistral para todos los presentes y quienes nos siguen en streaming. Y después tendremos la oportunidad de conversar con ella sobre los grupos de investigación y las redes de colaboración que la Asociación Internacional para el Estudio de los Medios y la Comunicación realiza. Ella, que está a cargo de esta asociación en este periodo, pues tendrá la oportunidad de compartir con nosotros esas experiencias, y para nosotros será muy enriquecedor conocer su punto de vista y los proyectos que hay para la asociación. Nos acompaña también el doctor Rodrigo Gómez, quien es miembro del Departamento de Ciencias de la Comunicación y un importante participante de la Asociación Internacional para el Estudio de los Medios de Comunicación, y a quien debemos la presencia de la doctora Janet Wasko el día de hoy con nosotros, y el profesor nos hará el favor de presentar a la profesora y hablar más a detalle de la importancia, la relevancia de la conferencia del día de hoy. Sin más, muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí con nosotros. Les doy la palabra al doctor Rodrigo Gómez.
Muchas gracias, Jesús. Muchas gracias al Departamento por la iniciativa. También muchas gracias a Janet. Thank you, Janet, to be here. Gracias por estar aquí. Janet, es un honor para la Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana tenerte el día de hoy y compartir contigo estas 4 horitas más o menos que vamos a tener de trabajo. Rápidamente voy a presentar a la doctora Wasko. Ella, hay que decirlo, es una de las principales académicas en la línea de investigación de la economía política de la comunicación y la cultura. Hizo su doctorado en la Universidad de Illinois. En los últimos años, ya van a ser 8 años, como presidenta de la IMCR, y también fue jefa de la sección de la sección de economía política de esa misma asociación. Podría yo seguir hablando de su trayectoria académica. Quisiera destacar simplemente que claramente Janet se ha abierto camino en una tierra de hombres, por así decirlo. Ahora ya esto ha cambiado de manera significativa, pero hace 40 años era raro que hubiera mujeres, y ha sido un ejemplo claramente en ese sentido. Dentro de sus obras más importantes yo podría destacar 2, ha escrito varios libros, pero 2 han sido muy importantes justamente para la línea de investigación de la economía política de la comunicación y la cultura. Uno es Understanding Disney, que justamente el próximo año se va a reeditar ese libro. Hay muchas cosas nuevas sobre el universo Disney, sobre todo como compañía global mediática. Y el otro, claramente, que también ha influido de manera significativa en los estudios antes mencionados, es el de How Hollywood Works, que también ha sido muy, muy importante para el estudio de la economía política del cine o de la industria cinematográfica. Podría yo seguir con otros libros, sobre todo coordinados por ella. El último o de los últimos podría señalar Global Media Giants, The Handbook of Political Economy of Communication, Cross-Border Cultural Productions, Economic Runaway or Globalization. Serían algunos de los más importantes. Ella pertenece a la Universidad de Oregon, en donde es profesora que tiene la cátedra Knight de aquella universidad, y fundó el programa de doctorado y de posgrado sobre estudios sobre medios. En fin, tiene una larga trayectoria, puso en el mapa de los estudios de comunicación y de medios a la Universidad de Oregon, también eso hay que subrayarlo. Hace 25, 30 años la Universidad de Oregon no era muy conocida por los estudios en comunicación. Llega Janet y eso cambia de manera significativa, claro, con otros colegas, pero hay que señalar ese aspecto. Yo hasta ahí lo dejaría y le cedo la palabra a Janet. Janet, thank you to be here. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. And in fact, thank you all for being here. I want to more formally thank Rodrigo, especially, for inviting me, and also I want to say it's Thanksgiving in the United States, so I want to start with thanking all of you, and Rodrigo especially, and I also want to mention, if you don't know, it's Rodrigo's birthday. So happy birthday, Rodrigo. He told me that maybe he wants to keep it a secret, but I can't keep secrets. So happy birthday, feliz cumpleaños. As Rodrigo mentioned, my research over the years has focused on political economy of media. Today I wanted to focus on some issues related to studying media corporations, and perhaps I don't need to make this this point so strongly, but I think that it's still very important to study media corporations. And I believe there's still a major component of understanding media around the world. The research questions are quite broad when we look at corporations, the relationships with the state, with the government, with other sectors, with other corporations and other institutions, as well as with audiences and consumers. And I think that there are different approaches to studying these relationships. Again, I will focus on looking at them from, to begin with, a political economic perspective. But also I want to add an interdisciplinary systems approach to looking at corporations, and specifically use Disney as a case study, because that's where I've been focusing some attention to using these concepts and analytical approaches. So it's not just that this discussion applies to Disney, it could also apply to a lot of other media corporations. So I base my analysis to begin with, I think, on the critical study of political economy of media and communication. This is an approach, I believe, that has been developed over many years, as Rodrigo mentioned, early on mostly by men, but now it's quite diverse, and also I think around the world more and more researchers and scholars are using this approach. If we want to say a little bit about what is studied, there are many, many definitions, but just to use for our purposes here today, I want to use one offered by Dallas Smythe, a Canadian researcher who worked in the US as well. And he explained in the 1950s, that looking at political economy of media would involve looking at the structure and policies of media and communication institutions in their social settings. It's a rather broad definition, but I think it's useful to highlight because of this notion of structure and policies, and also the notion that we need to look at these institutions within a broader setting, within their social settings. Media institutions, I'm going to narrow today to be corporations. Now, there are other media institutions, but certainly around the world, corporations, again, I think are still important. I think also media corporations sometimes are studied in a way very narrowly. So I want to broaden our discussions, our study of corporations, and suggest that we need to perhaps think in terms of a more holistic analysis or more integrative analysis, linking them with this kind of study with other kinds of approaches that might be called interdisciplinary, or might also adhere to a kind of systemic or systems approach. I think these are useful for looking at corporations, and I've been trying to do this with Disney over the last years. I think this expanded study of corporations, maybe I will give it a new name, and I don't know if anyone will like it, but I'm going to call it Critical Political Economy Plus, to open up and connect to other approaches. Maybe it sounds a little familiar, of course. I'm talking about Disney today, and you may know that they just came out with a new service, streaming service called Disney Plus. So maybe I'm influenced by this to want to have a political economy plus. We'll see. So, as Rodrigo mentioned, I have a new edition of this book, Understanding Disney, and my apologies for promoting it, but I'm going to today try to do a kind of overview of the book to give this sense of going beyond political economy to integrate other kinds of approaches, and give you a kind of overview of this new edition, because there's been some changes with Disney over the last years. And again, this book will be out in March. And it has a nice low price, I think, too. I'm happy. Anyway, enough promotion. I want to not go into so much detail, but try to give you a sense of the whole. I think for any study, and especially for studying the political economy of communications and media, we have to start with history, a historical background, a historical development, and it's essential that we do this. The other more common place to start with studying corporations is with looking at management, with ownership, the finances of the company, its structure, and so forth. Beyond that, we also need to look at its strategies. It's one thing to just talk about what the company owns, but how do they actually operate? What are their strategies? To go beyond just political economy, though, I think we should try to talk about products that are produced by corporations, ideologies, content. Sometimes we let others do that, but I think there's a value in integrating these approaches. The other area that sometimes is neglected are audiences or consumers. They are assumed to be a certain way, but I think we need to pay more attention to them. And of course, always, why Otherwise, why would we study these corporations? We want to study their impact and their effects. So this is a brief overview of the way the book is structured, and I'll focus now a little bit on more details about Disney in particular to give you some sense of these areas. I won't bore you with the history of the Disney company. It's entwined with the biography of Walt Disney very tightly. It's very interesting. I teach classes on the Disney company, and it's very controversial if you start to maybe even criticize a little bit Walt Disney. He's thought, at least in the US, of being, well, a genius, at least, and more, right? But there's a history that we need to look at, and it's entwined with the Disney company. It's also entwined with technology. The Disney company started as a very small animation company, and over the years actually struggled quite a bit to survive. But eventually they prospered thanks to technology. This is an image of the multi-plane camera that they developed in the 30s, but also with characters and appealing characters like Mickey Mouse and so forth. They developed through feature animation productions like Snow White, the first one in the 1930s, and continued to produce more feature films that became quite popular. And again, I won't bore you with all of the details. By the 50s, they were doing okay, but then started diversifying and integrating. They diversified into theme parks, as you know, probably with the first one in Anaheim, California, Disneyland, but also into television, which at the time was slowly emerging. The Disney company was one of the first of the film studios to participate in television, and it was intertwined with the theme parks as well. The other point in the 50s, they moved from just producing their films to also distributing them. For years, they relied on other companies to distribute their films. So they integrated into film distribution through Buena Vista International. Today, of course, they are extremely diversified, very large. It's a huge global conglomerate which continues to grow and diversify. And we'll talk about a little bit of the areas that they're involved in a minute. So briefly, the history can go on longer, but again, I think it's important to lay that foundation for the study of any company. We move on then to looking at who owns and controls the company. And this is a very standard, common, important question that's asked of any corporation. Who owns it? How is it controlled? For the Disney company, it was a family company for many, many years. In the 50s, it spread its stock across other, beyond the family. And it was managed by Walt Disney for many years. In the 80s, the person at the top, Michael Eisner, took over and expanded the company extensively. It's important to look at chief executive officers to see what kind of leaders they are, but not just to look at them alone. Today, Bob Iger, at the bottom left, is the CEO and has made some significant changes in the company, but also certainly continues some of the traditions. So that's management. We also have what's called a board of directors. It's important to understand this when we look at control of the corporation. This is one of the board of directors a few years ago. There's been a few changes, but the board of directors of Disney is similar to other corporations' boards of directors. They represent other companies that are interlocked with other corporations. So we have people on the board of Disney that were involved with, as you can see in red, Procter & Gamble, Sybase, Estee Lauder, Facebook, Starbucks, Seagram. They have new ones now, but this represents the kind of interlocking interests that corporations have. How much control do directors have? Well, significant control, but it depends on the board, and one needs to look at this very carefully to see what the dynamics of the ownership relationships are. And speaking of ownership, certainly there are major shareholders that must be identified to understand this power structure in corporations. At the top, the major shareholders in the 80s involved Disney Company, plus other financiers. The fellow in the tuxedo is one of the Bass brothers from Texas who bought a controlling share of Disney in the 1980s and were very influential in moving them into a very strong, diversified corporation. They had a lot of money, but they let basically the management make decisions. More recently, however, in the top right, you might recognize, perhaps, Steve Jobs, who became a very strong major shareholder, thanks to the relationship with Pixar and so forth, and did become involved in the company. He wasn't on the board of directors, but very, very active and very influential. The other image is of a share of the Disney company, which a lot of children may receive as gifts sometimes, but it's 1 or 2 shares. The major shareholders have hundreds, thousands of shares. So obviously, there's a different level of control in ownership. These are key questions for political economy. We also, of course, often want to look at finances and financial factors. And I think it's important to use the descriptions that the company, the corporation provides us. They are not shy about saying why they're doing what they're doing. Their mission is to be, for Disney, one of the world's leading producers and providers of entertainment and information, providing brands, content, services, consumer products. But I think importantly, and you might say this is the case for most corporations, perhaps, their financial goals are to maximize earnings and cash flow, to allocate capital profitability towards growth and long-term shareholder value. It's not surprising, I think, to any of us that they are interested in profits. This is what their goal is. And they have been making a lot of money recently. This is 2018. We're not finished with 2019, but last year it was up to almost $60 billion, which is quite a bit. It isn't the largest company in the United States. Sometimes my students think it is. It isn't. However, it's one of the largest entertainment companies in the world. There's no doubt about that. We also then need to look at how they raise these profits, how they are structured. And this is one example of one year. It varies every year in terms of the different divisions of the company and how much revenue they provide, how much revenue they bring in. This is from 2017, and media networks, it's rather small on this image, brought in the largest amount of revenue. This is to a great extent because of ESPN, which they own. The parks almost always are second largest. Their entertainment division varies every year, and then their consumer division. The other important thing to know is that corporation structures change. And so just as you prepare something, for instance, for publication, they decide to change their structure. So this isn't the latest structure of the company, but it will still give us a sense of how it's organized and what how the company is structured. Very briefly, because I could bore you all day with a description of what Disney owns and what is involved in these different divisions. The highlights are the Media Networks division includes their cable networks and broadcasting. I mentioned ESPN, which is not just in the US, the largest sports channel, but all over the world. The Disney channels, which are also all over the world, they have finally, as of in the 1990s, gained a television network, which is still important despite other developments in media. And they developed a radio network and also, of course, other kinds of media networks. So this is a very significant part of their revenue and of their activities. Their theme parks have expanded beyond Disneyland in California. As you may know, there are now 6 Disney locations. They call them resorts now because they are not just theme parks. They are hotels and recreation centers and so forth and so forth. The last one that opened was in Shanghai. There is some talk of where the next one will be. It was perhaps to be in China. I'm not sure what those plans are looking like now. I don't know. But we'll see. These parks, we also might mention, if you look at their organization, are not totally owned by Disney. Several of them are in collaboration with national companies or governments, yet the Disney company still makes an enormous amount of money from each of them. Studio entertainment has expanded dramatically. Not just Disney films, Disney pictures, and all of their brands or labels, but they have added, as you may know, Pixar, Marvel films, Lucasfilms, National Geographic as part of the Fox Entertainment properties. So this is a major development since 2000. They have added significant expansion. This expansion has involved already developed and successful brands. And I think that's an important point as well. All of these brands, of course, lead to consumer products. There's a lot of interactive media involved, and also that, of course, includes their streaming service now, which is the Disney Plus that opened a few weeks ago. Again, I could go on quite a bit longer talking about this, but I think you know, or you need to trust me to say it's an extremely large corporation, very diversified and very global. Once upon a time, people described the Disney universe. I'm glad you got that. It truly does seem to be a universe, or at least at the heart of it is a Disney universe. But I think, and I've developed in the latest edition of the Disney book, the notion that it's no longer just a Disney universe, but a Disney multiverse. Let me explain a little bit. Maybe you can just take that and agree, but let me just say, a multiverse, what is a multiverse? It has a lot of definitions, depending what field you're talking about, but a group of multiple universes a collection of potentially diverse, observable universes. So I think Disney, we want to say it's a Disney multiverse and include all of the components of the Walt Disney Company. Not just the management, directors, shareholders that I talked about previously, but also the employees. The corporate ethos, their policies, their strategies, which we'll talk about in a minute. Their different divisions, everything they own, all of their products, services, properties. That's quite a bit. I would also want to include under that their content, the narratives, the themes, styles, values, meanings. I know we're now getting into a little bit beyond political economy, but I think we need to take all of this into account. In addition, the audiences, consumers, and fans. It could look something like this, which is maybe a little too, it's a difficult image, but this represents the kind of universes that are included in the multiverse. I don't want to get too far out there, but the point here is that it's beyond just the Disney company, all of these other companies that they have bought. Well, Marvel is known as its own universe, for instance, right? So it makes it more complex to study, but it's also, I think, what exists at the moment. I want to move a little bit further in talking about the Disney company and talk about their strategies. It's one thing just to talk about what they own, but how do they actually operate? How have they been able to build this large company? And there are various strategies that I've identified, and I'm not going to go into great depth, but just to mention them briefly. The first, and I call this corporate Disney in action. The first one that's fairly well known is synergy. And of the Hollywood companies, Disney is the one that does this the best. Their different divisions work together to build the Disney brand. They work together to produce one product that then leads to another product and another product and another product, as I'm sure you know. So synergy is not something that it's just accidental. They plan it very carefully. There are people whose job it is in the corporation to watch for synergy. That's their job. Obviously, this expands the Disney brand and all of their other brands. They are very, very deliberate at expanding these brands, and it doesn't just happen automatically. They also, with the recent additions, they have deepened the Disney demographics, meaning they have added, for instance, companies like Marvel that appeal to, well, a wide range of people, especially boys and men, I think, whereas they had products that did previously, but it deepens these demographics further. Pixar, I think, also does the same thing, especially Pixar is popular, again, with young boys. So they've deepened the demographics of audiences they appeal to. Control is a key term that connects to Disney in many, many ways. They are very controlling of just about everything. Copyright, they are extremely controlling of the intellectual properties that they own. They are extremely tough in terms of the way they deal with other Hollywood companies, and especially with their labor. If you are interested, there's a lot of written about the employees at the theme parks, how rigorous their rules are, how they should behave, how they should look, and so forth. So control is an absolutely key concept, strategy for the Disney company. Globalization, of course, it's been the case since the 30s that Disney products have been popular around the world, but that now they more deliberately distribute their products internationally. I call making the magic revolving around technology. Their technological development is again very deliberate. They are involved with a lot of research on the latest technologies, robotics they have been working on for quite a while, artificial intelligence and so forth. All of this go into their products, to their theme parks and so forth. They are very good at marketing their products. And I don't need to say too much more about that. You experienced this here, I know. On the way here, I saw several billboards for Frozen 2, for instance. But marketing is a very, very important part of their strategies. And then this notion of corporate social responsibility is something that is not rare. It's common for corporations now to tell us how good they are, and how nice they are, and how they support their communities, and so forth. And the environment, especially. We have so many corporations that are doing such wonderful things. I'm being sarcastic here, for the environment. The Disney company, especially under Bob Iger, the latest CEO, has really hit this hard, and they're very deliberate in promoting their corporate activities around social responsibility. And I think that's an important point. We move now to go beyond the company, the corporation, its organization, its profits, but to talk about their products, their ideologies, reading the Disney multiverse. Walt Disney never wanted to talk about what his films meant. This is a quote that he said often, "Let the professors tell us what they mean." And many professors try to do that. In fact, there's a wide range of work, academic work these days on the Disney company, Disney products. And interdisciplinarity really is the case, because we have scholars from a lot of different fields, cultural and film studies, maybe obviously, anthropology, folklore, sociology, political science, art. Many other disciplines have examined Disney messages, text, and so forth. Some of them critical, but some of them celebratory, celebrating Disney. Well, despite what the company says, some of their products seem to be somewhat problematic to many academics. But Disney itself wants to tell us what they are all about. And I think it's a long quote, but I think it's the points in red highlight this message. They want to say that Disney is special to millions of people because they are universal, their themes and characters are universal and relevant to everyone. They strive to create and share stories and entertain, reflecting the incredibly rich diversity of the human experience, and remain committed to creating characters that are accessible and relatable to all children. So it's a very bold statement, I believe, which many people would find somewhat problematic. Certainly many academics find it problematic, and I think also other people do as well. There are many narrative universes within the Disney multiverse these days. So for a while it was just the Disney universe and their narrative. But these days there are narrative universes that identify themselves before even Disney came along. The Marvel universe is extensive. The Lucas universe, well, it's mostly Star Wars, right? But that seems to be enough. And then the Pixar universe, which is constantly expanded. So each of these may develop their own themes, meanings, and so forth, right? The classic Disney universe and formula, and I won't go into detail here, it's a little bit too much, but for many, many years, the Disney formula, especially for their animated films, could be characterized and described rather consistently. It involved music, fairy tales, formulaic heroes, heroines especially, villains, a lot of stereotypes. The themes were very all-American, individualistic, involved romance, good over evil, and so forth and so forth. I mean, we could sit down right now and write a Disney film, and it would look very similar to many, many of the Disney films previously. However, they have been trying to address some of the critiques that have been lodged towards them for some of the problematic, especially representations. We can now perhaps identify an old Disney and a new Disney. Mostly when it comes to gender, the representation of gender and diversity. This is where they have paid some attention. It's very obvious. In fact, by the way, my students now, some of them call Disney a very progressive company because they are doing all of these things. But what are they doing? Well, we have a range of princesses. Some, yes, but now they're sold all together, right? But at least there's a bit of diversity. And in fact, some of them, it is argued, are much different than previous princesses. They are more bold, outgoing, even aggressive, empowered. I want to represent this and see if this video works. I don't know if you're familiar with this film, Ralph Breaks the Internet. There's a scene which is quite interesting, and it's in it, not just the princesses, but it's the princesses in a way making light of being princesses. So it's Disney kind of acknowledging that these princesses have been problematic in the past. So I don't know if the setting is that there's a character in this film called Vanellope von Sweets. She is a video game heroine, and she finds a room on the internet where all the princesses are gathered. Let's see if it will play.
Whoa, ladies, I can explain. See, I'm a princess too.
Wait, what?
Yeah, Princess Vanellope von Schweetz of the Sugar Rush von Schweetzes. I'm sure you've heard of us, so it'd be embarrassing for you if you haven't.
What kind of a princess are you?
What kind?
Do you have magic hair?
No.
Magic hands?
No.
Do animals talk to you?
No.
Were you poisoned?
No.
Cursed?
No.
Kidnapped or enslaved?
No. Are you guys okay? Should I call the police?
Then I have to assume you made a deal with an underwater sea witch where she took your voice in exchange for a pair of human legs?
No. Good Lord, who would do that?
Have you ever had true love's kiss?
Ew, barf.
Do you have daddy issues?
I don't even have a mom.
Neither do we. And now for the $1,000,000 question. Do people assume all your problems got solved because a big, strong man showed up?
Yes. What is up with that?
She is a princess.
Okay. Okay, that's the bit. It goes on in other scenes to also represent the princesses making fun of each other and themselves. But it's a very interesting thing that Disney started doing is kind of acknowledging the critiques, right? At any rate, I still think that there is something to say about also the diverse princesses that have been introduced. Certainly, there have been some new princesses, and they are different. Moana at the top right receives a lot of attention for being a new kind of princess, empowered and not interested just in a prince and so forth. And then The Princess and the Frog, the first black Disney princess, and also images from the Black Panther. But some think this is, well, it is different. It is a change. However, some would see perhaps some problems and also perhaps some of the same things going on. For instance, they made the princess from Princess and the Frog into a doll, of course, an image for the princess's franchise, but made her lighter. And there was a campaign to try to, as it says, tell Disney to stop whitewashing. And the other point made about the Princess and the Frog was, in many ways, it was absence of the notion of race. So almost negating the diversity by not acknowledging racial components. There's been that critique. There's also, of course, the Black Panther, which received enormous amount of attention and praise. Still, some were a little bit critical from the black community in that this represented a black community that was very separate as one of the critiques. So there are still issues, yet you can't say that it hasn't been a change. There's also, and I wonder perhaps what all of you think about the film Coco. It has a history, an interesting one, but my sense from people I've talked to is that it did receive a relatively positive reaction. And perhaps we can, you can tell me more about that in the discussion. But again, an interesting attempt to be more diverse, to be more diversified. So I would say that yes, they are trying, but there still is a lot of continuity with Disney ideology and Disney themes. Let's turn to audiences, and this is where, when we often do political economic analysis, we don't do too much with audiences, but we do, yeah. We do, we don't. We get accused of not doing very much. But I think we need to be perhaps a little more deliberate. And for Disney, first of all, of course, it's not true that everyone adores Disney. Their statement about its universally beloved is not true. It isn't. Many and millions of people do love Disney, like Disney. Some are obsessed with Disney. And I started to try to figure out how we might characterize these different kinds of audiences, and so came up with this kind of archetype, a Disney archetype, starting with fanatics. And some may find that harsh to say fanatics, but they call themselves fanatics. So I think it's okay. Many, many, many millions of fans, even more consumers. There are people who are very cynical about Disney. They're not sure, but still they'll go to see the films, perhaps. But they're a little cynical in various ways. There are some totally uninterested, could care less about Disney, which some people in the U.S. find amazing, and they don't believe it. There are those who also resist, actively resist, in that notion of, we can go back to Stuart Hall's notion of resistance, I think, by audiences. And then there are those who, as represented at the bottom, there are those who actually are antagonistic towards Disney. And these are not just from progressive groups in the left, but also from the right. There are people who criticize Disney from a very conservative position as well. So there are these various audience types. I've tried to also integrate the kinds of images and art and other kinds of things people do with Disney. And here we have some, obviously, maybe you've seen some things like this, what fans, and I think a lot of children are fans, or they really do love Disney, at least Mickey Mouse, and they create their own images, right? I don't know about the hello retards, but it's still, I think, a loving kind of creation in a way. But there's a lot of other, well, at the top it says Mickey Mouse is really bad. That could be negative or positive, I don't know. At any rate, there are a lot of other things that go on with people who really adore Disney. In fact, I wonder if you're going to get a Mickey Mouse birthday cake today, Rodrigo. Sure. These are examples, yes, of the kinds of things that people create from Disney images, from Disney representations. But then there are others who take, and I have kind of slid into the section in the book where I talk about artists and fan arts and various kinds of satirical reactions to Disney. And artists over the years have taken Disney images and reworked them, remixed them, and so forth, a lot of them. And then we have those that are rather negative, the remixing of Disney that takes on a satirical or very cynical image. And these are all over the internet. I mean, this is just a sampling of those. And they can also get rather gross, rather very, very negative. There are also the kind of playful ones that revolve around the princesses. There's so many of these, but this is just an idea. There are also the more profound takeoff satire of Disney and Disneyland. And this is from the, art creation in the UK a couple of years ago. Banksy and others put together this theme park, and they said it was critiquing theme parks in general, but really, I mean, it's called Dismaland, so it really took on Disney. It was only there for a while, but it was a very cutting and interesting critique of Disney and the theme parks. So what about the impact and the effects of Disney? Certainly there have been very, very serious impacts and effects on Hollywood itself. Disney now dominates Hollywood, and it just is not an exaggeration. In fact, the Frozen 2 did come out. In the first 5 days, it made $160 million. And that is a record that has beaten other records. It beat a previous record of The Avengers, which of course is also owned by Disney. And they are making an enormous number of films that are doing amazing at the box office. So they are really dominating Hollywood, dominating the box office. There's no doubt. Star Wars is yet to come. It will be big. They are suggesting that it may go over $200 million in the first weekend in the U.S., well, in North America. Hollywood still, by the way, considers Canada part of their domestic box office. Not Mexico, though. So they say North American revenues will exceed 200 million. So for the year, Disney will do very, very, very well again. There is reactions to this. Some people react with these memes that appear. There are all kinds of things all over the internet that show resistance to Disney. This notion that Disney puts thoughts in young women's heads about falling in love and so forth is still out there. And then this guy who says we need to make sure that Disney doesn't monopolize everything. Well, they don't monopolize everything yet, but they continue to be quite successful. Even though there is a lot of criticism. This is one of the images that I like, showing that Disney may certainly show some wear and tear from the critiques. They may get very, very big and not be able to manage their multiverse. There also there are a lot of contradictions and rejection of Disney because it's becoming so big. We'll see. However, my point here, I think, to conclude, is that I think that we need to be involved with Disney as a whole in terms of our studies and our studies of corporations as well. We need a critical understanding not only of Disney, but a more general critique of corporate and consumer culture, which of course Disney contributes to greatly. And also we need to involve approaches that go beyond political economy, perhaps political economy plus, to look at the whole corporation and a lot of different kinds of effects based on the expansion of these corporations and their domination of popular culture. I think I will end there and encourage any kind of comments, corrections, questions, and so forth. So thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Pues está abierta la sala para preguntas, comentarios. Thanks, Janet. I think it was very enlightened, your talk. Maybe I will do a question, or I will do it in Spanish, I think. Janet, ¿qué formas también tú encuentras de Disney ha generado para crear poder político? O sea, ¿cuál es la forma en la cual Disney influye en la política estadounidense? O sea, también, ¿qué tanto gasta en los partidos políticos? Me parece que por ahí hay un área que también sería interesante señalar, ¿no? Yo sé que lo has tratado, pero en esta presentación no se ve, pero sí me gustaría que nos abundaras un poco en esa otra vertiente que me parece que es muy importante para Disney, porque al final también ayuda a que se acepten concentraciones como la FCC o competencia, o la entidad de competencia económica en los Estados Unidos, como que absorba o compre a la 20th Century Fox, por ejemplo, ¿no? Por ahí me parece que también me gustaría que abundaras un poco.
Thank you very much, and I think you identified one of the gaps in my presentation, because it is covered in the book, and it is important. In fact, if we say political economy, we have to pay some attention to the political. As other corporations, American corporations, the Disney company contributes to the government in various ways. They contribute to campaigns for a lot of different offices, including the presidential elections. What's interesting about that, I think, is even though, of course, the current president and government may assume that the Disney company, like Hollywood, is quite progressive and not consistent with their ideology, well, they still rely on the government to support their activities, to okay their mergers and so forth, in addition to paving the way for global exports and so forth. For years that has been the case for Hollywood products. They have assistance from the state for their international activities. Actually, my advisor, Tom Guback, studied that years ago, and it's very important. But the campaign contributions, I think, is interesting to note that, for instance, Disney doesn't just contribute to either Republican or Democrat. They contribute to both because they don't know. They have to remain on the side of whoever wins, right? So they don't take these very strong political positions because they still have to appeal to a broad base, and they need the government to assist them in various ways. There are other connections that are made. Very silly one is that often Hollywood films and I think probably Disney films are shown at the White House for various events. But there's other kinds of activities that go on that connect them to the state. If we look internationally, there are other kinds of examples of them clearing the way for their products to get into various markets, and for them to be able to take advantage of different kinds of tax breaks and other kinds of subsidies in markets. The American government helps with that, and they also work with other governments. So those are some of the ways that they become involved in this. They probably... Well, another point might be that Bob Iger, who seems to be pretty good, much better than the previous CEO, Michael Eisner, in terms of representing a very intelligent and smart guy, is very popular, it seems, and even considered running for president. He, as far as I know, is not considering that anymore. Because he has a lot to do with all of the things that they have been adding, the Fox acquisition and so forth. But you're right, I think this is very important to include that, and I kind of apologize because I didn't include it in my overview. So it's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hola. Thank you for your presentation. I have to say that I used to hate Disney, but I was thinking about that maybe it was about the old Disney, you know, Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and all these narratives, fairy tales. And now, my son, who's 1 year old, every day, sees a Toy Story. He's a big fan, so I'm in the middle of this struggle, you know, this critical standpoint from the university and my everyday life with my son and all the toys, and you know. So I was thinking that the old Disney is about Mickey Mouse, but not the new one. I mean, the new one is cool. Is Luke Skywalker, is Spider-Man, is Buzz Lightyear. So the narrative is changing, and the generations are, you know, changing with them. So when I was a student, I used to read this book, Para leer al Pato Donald from Matelart. So we understand Disney as equal to imperialism. So right now I don't think that's the association with Disney between my students. They think about Disney like in terms of you know, maybe we were resistors and now they are more cynical, or I don't know. There's some resistance to the critical point of view. So something's changing, and Disney, I know, they have to know, they know how to make business. So they are, you know, they are evolving into a new, I don't know how to say it, a new they are in culture with children. So I have, that was common. So I have 3 questions. The first one is about the collision between Netflix and Disney. So what's happening there? I mean, we are seeing Toy Story in Netflix. So Disney is already in these over-the-top companies. But what's happening between this collision? How do you see, as an expert, how Disney and Disney Plus is going to evolve in this ecosystem of streaming companies? So this is the first question. And the second one is, what's the relationship between Disney and business and big data? I mean, they know how to do all these movies, but they are going to have a lot of more information about the consumers, about how they use the platform, how they understand all the contents, and etc. So that's the second question. And the third one is about Disney and propaganda. So we have to think about Disney right now, and at this time, at this point, like, just a corporation, or is beyond that? Is how Disney represents capitalism, and how this is intertwined with this new, this new world order. So that's the third one. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. One of the categories of audiences that I developed was different kinds of consumers. So there are the regular consumers who are very excited about Disney. There are reluctant consumers who may have children who want Disney, but you may not want Disney in your home. I think maybe you're a reluctant consumer, in addition to a cynic, right? So there are crossovers and combinations. But thank you for those comments. Your questions are difficult. Thank you. Netflix and the relationship, well, they've been predicting that Disney Plus will take over as the leading streaming service. But the way they started has been rather rocky with all kinds of problems. Nevertheless, people are still subscribing. And I believe that Toy Story will not be available from Netflix, but I'm not sure.
In the U.S.
Oh, in the U.S.?
In Mexico.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And Netflix apparently is expanding internationally quite a bit. So I always have difficulty with questions that ask about predicting the future. Because a lot of things could happen, but certainly they represent a challenge to Netflix, because they will control all of those brands. Again, I don't have any insights. I don't know who I would bet on, but again, these companies that have dominated, they don't have monopolies always. They have monopolies over their brand. And certainly Disney has a number of brands, popular brands, but they can take competition, as they have. Hollywood has been an oligopoly for years and still is, more or less. So we'll see. We'll have to watch. They have to improve their customer service, at least. In the U.S., it's been disastrous for Disney Plus. Big data. I mentioned their activities with research and new technologies and so forth. They have interesting components, not a division, but it's called Disney Research, and they are working with academics, for instance, in different fields, as well as others, to develop a lot of different kinds of technologies. Some of them, of course, they've been using big data in terms of keeping track of their consumers and studying markets and so forth, like any company. But there's some interesting, maybe scary even, work they're doing with technology that examines facial reactions to people watching films and how they react, and they're studying their faces in very sophisticated ways. So I think that they are going to be involved in whatever goes on in terms of the newer technologies, including big data, including artificial intelligence, and so forth. So how they will use it remains to be seen, but most often the Disney company always comes back to, we are about entertainment. So, and this in a way connects to your last question about propaganda. That's, again, how they want to be seen. They are entertainment. They're not a company that represents, propaganda or governments or political kinds of issues. We know, of course, there are ideologies associated with media. I think that it's interesting you say, are they just a business? Well, yes, they're a business that represents capitalism and a successful example of capitalism. I guess I can tell a story. I was just in Beijing last week at their largest national association of communication and media researchers, and talked about Disney similarly. And there was a respondent who, first of all, was very excited and said, we in China need more companies like Disney. So I guess I wasn't critical enough in my presentation to say I have problems with it, but he saw it and others see it as something to be emulated. It is an example of capitalism, of course. And so the other analysis that has been used for a while now is rather than cultural imperialism and all of those arguments, it's soft culture or soft power, right? Which I'm not so sure that's not still a relevant kind of analysis to make about Disney. Yeah, so I hope that answers some of the questions. Again, the future, I don't know. I can see some issues with Disney trying to keep that company together as it's enlarging and so forth. In fact, they were disappointed with some of the Fox properties this year that they didn't make enough money. But it's hard to say exactly whether they'll overtake Netflix or what will happen. So, yeah. Thank you.
Well, sí, bueno, hay muchas ideas que plantear en esta retroalimentación después de tantas ideas tan estimulantes que ha habido en esta conferencia. Muchas gracias. Hay dos puntos que me gustaría preguntar y abundar. Así como mi colega habló de una experiencia personal, yo recuerdo también que siendo estudiante en la universidad, el concepto de sinergia en medios de comunicación, el ejemplo por excelencia era Disney. Es decir, yo comprendí el sentido de sinergia entre compañías y diferentes niveles de producción mediática a través de la experiencia de Disney, de la compañía Disney, en estudios en comunicación. Es decir, no solamente le dieron sentido a este concepto, sino que lo han asumido como propio y han establecido los estándares para romper una tendencia monopólica y dar un sentido muy creativo a la reorganización de capitales y producción cultural, que me parece que en gran medida es el sentido de que sea un objeto de estudio la compañía tan importante para los estudiosos en comunicación. Agradezco mucho que en su presentación usted haya mencionado 8 estrategias o elementos dentro de una estrategia de sinergia que nos van a ayudar mucho a pensar y entender los elementos que hacen falta para analizar críticamente cualquier compañía internacional. Estas estrategias me trajeron a mente teóricos de la comunicación, tal vez clásicos en el sentido, no sé, en el sentido canadiense, Harold Innis, y usted mencionó también a Dallas Smythe, quienes me parece tuvieron una visión crítica para entender los monopolios mediáticos estadounidenses, tal vez en el carácter periférico que tiene Canadá respecto a sus primos estadounidenses. Eso conecta, me parece, con algunos enfoques que desde México tenemos, dada la relación periférica que compartimos con Canadá, y me sorprende las similitudes que hay en la construcción de una visión crítica, es decir, analizando las estructuras, las políticas específicas de las compañías. Y bueno, en estos 2 sentidos me gustaría pedirle que abundara un poco más, ¿no?, en esa parte de historia de la teoría de la comunicación para abordar este objeto de estudio, y por el otro lado, ¿qué más nos puede decir respecto a la sinergia como una estrategia fundamental de Disney? Gracias.
Thank you for the response and for the question. I think that you're very correct in that there's been a lot of attention to Disney, but in some ways, surprisingly, it's just been relatively recent. In the 90s, I think with the growth of Disney, perhaps, it became essential to pay some attention. But if you go back to the 70s or earlier, there wasn't so much written about Disney from communication and media scholars. Then there was a boom, and in fact, they started calling it Disney Studies. And newspaper reporters would do articles that were very sarcastic. You know, can you believe what is being studied at universities these days? Mickey Mouse. So it's still thought of as quite trivial. Still, but there are a lot more people studying it. And I think anyone looking at media and communications, and especially the global situation, would identify Disney as a key component, not just because of what they produce, but how powerful they are. And actually, if you look at the broad range of what they own, it's not just cartoons, animation, children's products, right? So synergy in a sense, interested in you saying that they have adopted it as their own concept, which in a way they have. It's not just in terms of, it's not just a business concept, but synergy is a biological concept and draws on a lot of different, affects a lot of other disciplines as well. The use of it for media and communication is in a couple of ways. One definition would be synergy across different corporations, right? And sometimes that's the way it's defined. But of course, with Disney, they do that. Certainly, they work with other media companies as what that happens in oligopolies, but also they work with other corporations. For instance, if you go to the theme parks, there are rides and other kinds of exhibits and so forth that are sponsored by other corporations, right? So and this has been the case since the early theme parks. So they work with other corporations. That's a kind of synergy. They are especially, however, I think, they have developed the notion of synergy within their corporation. There are literally directors of synergy. That is a job at Disney. If you're interested in a job, my students are all interested in that. They think that's really interesting. So synergy for them is whatever product they produce, they are already thinking as they produce it of all of the other products that come out of it. They are working on promoting it across the multiverse. They don't call it the multiverse, but and so it's a very active kind of thing that is at the heart these days, I think, of their corporation. So this, I think, is a key strategy, but it's not the only one, as I suggested. The idea of which you suggested about communication and communication theories and so forth, yes, we need to keep that in mind, and recalling Smythe and Innes and the Canadian response to American media companies reminds me of NAFTA. And also the person to talk to, I think, is sitting next to me about NAFTA, because Rodrigo has done some work on that in some publications. And I think that is extremely interesting in light of current U.S. policies. You need to update your work. But very different, the way, looking in terms of Hollywood as a whole, there have been slightly different kinds of developments and strategies, whereas Canada is seen as part of the domestic box office. Mexico is seen quite differently, right? So there's a different kind of relationship. There's a lot of production also that takes place by American companies in Canada still, runaway production. Not as much, maybe it's growing in Mexico, I'm not sure. So there's that kind of relationship as well. So I think maybe it's two areas, the question of synergy and then the question of these kinds of relationships, North American relationships as well as global relationships. So it would be perhaps of interest, though I'm not sure what's going on in terms of work around NAFTA these days, like North American media, and what are the relationships. Maybe Rodrigo knows more than I do. But that would be an interesting discussion to have. So.
Bueno, muchas gracias por la visita nuevamente. Y quisiera yo preguntar, a propósito de lo que comentó sobre lo bien que los chinos lo ejemplar que los chinos ven este tipo de compañías o el desarrollo de esta compañía, Disney específicamente, este ejemplo que tanto está cundiendo en el mundo en términos de otras compañías, no solamente como ellos se definen una compañía de entretenimiento, sino esta forma de hacer las cosas en compañías que no tienen esta misma vocación, ¿qué tanto está cundiendo este ejemplo en términos de, pues, del capitalismo, de esto que sigue siendo como que, a final de cuentas, el interés, el capital, es lo que en el fondo siento que sigue acomodando, moviendo todo, nueva tecnología, a lo mejor cambios de intenciones en ciertas cosas, pero el movimiento general y lo que finalmente va moviendo la forma en la que se construye esta compañía ejemplar, me parece que sigue teniendo una misma base. ¿Cómo ha cundido este ejemplo en esos términos?
It's a very good question, thank you. And I have to say that I agree with you, that I think despite a lot of discussion of new technologies and new ways of organizing companies, new ways of organizing media, even with the growth of social media and so forth, excuse me, I think capitalism is still moving, to quote you. Just in general, it's a very simplistic statement, but I think it's been able to adapt pretty well. There may be new companies, and new companies specifically in communication and media. Now we have all of those new names, we have all those new millionaires and billionaires. They are still heading capitalist companies, right? There may be different kinds of techniques. There may be the use of algorithms, the use of big data and so forth, but there's still, what is the purpose? So I would like to be hopeful. I think there at least is a lot of discussion of alternatives. But when you look around, they are still just discussions. I want to be hopeful and positive, and I think, again, there are possibilities and alternatives, but and things may not look always the same as Disney, as I've outlined Disney. There may be other kinds of strategies, even for media and communication corporations, but it's still pretty strong. I don't know about here, but for instance, at my university with my students, they're very critical of certain things. They're very on board with, they're very involved with issues relating to environmental issues. Young people are getting involved with that. But they're not really embracing alternatives to the system that has been around so long that really certainly helped create some of these issues. And so there's a lot of change that needs to happen before people will accept some of these alternatives. So I don't know. I wish I could have a nice, neat answer, but I have the same observations as you do, that it's still quite strong.
De vuelta una vez más, gracias por la conferencia, por abrirnos un poquito a este mundo de Disney y todas las implicaciones que tiene. Pues como todos crecimos bajo esta idea de Disney viendo a Disney y estudiando un poquito lo que hacía Disney, y siempre fue como muy claro que Disney era parte de la punta de lanza de la ideología de Estados Unidos, de la forma de vida de Estados Unidos y del capitalismo. Efectivamente, eso es como siempre fue visto así. Sin embargo, como lo ha mencionado y como es obvio verlo, ha ido modificando mucho en las últimas etapas la forma de presentar a los personajes y la forma de presentar la ideología preponderante, ¿no? Quisiera retomar un poquito el caso de Coco, que preguntaba sobre Coco. Entonces, bueno, ahí hay varias cosas que se me hacen muy interesantes. Por un lado está la parte, bueno, anteriormente ideológicamente me sorprendía mucho que dentro de esta historia de niños, de cuentos, de hadas, siempre eran muy crueles, eran sumamente crueles las historias, ¿no? Cosa que para cuentos de niños así triviales no lo eran. No entendía bien cómo jugaba esto, pero sí sé que tenía todo un trasfondo importante de mencionar, ¿no? Sí eran muy Bambi, Dumbo, etcétera, digo, eran sumamente crueles para los niños. Bueno, luego viene este cambio y estamos viendo, por decir, el momento de Coco. Coco, hay varias cosas que me llaman la atención, entre ellas empezando por el momento en que sale. Parecería que sale como una respuesta a una posición política de Trump, en donde Trump es totalmente anti-mexicano y se le está dando un valor a la cultura mexicana. Entonces, ahí hay un juego político interesante de jugar, de ver, de entender qué tanto hay un posicionamiento de parte de Disney, o por lo menos de una de las compañías de Disney, y probablemente con otras pueda haber otro, pero sí parecería una respuesta a la política contra México de Trump, no específicamente. Y luego, dentro de esta ideología, de forma de interactuar ideológicamente, a mí me llama mucho la atención, porque por un lado creo que respeta mucho la ideología y el mexicanismo, lo que es ser México, hay un profundo respeto. Sin embargo, lo que está contando en el fondo no es la historia que tenemos nosotros, no es lo que normalmente se hablaba, de que era la tradición del Día de Muertos. Me están dando una nueva historia a la cual yo tendré que aceptar o no. Y eso es muy interesante porque no sé ahí qué mecanismos o qué elementos estén jugando. Hemos sido afectados, por decir, el Día de Muertos en México ha sido ahorita muy afectado por la irrupción de este show que viene a partir de James Bond. Con James Bond se crea un nuevo movimiento en donde dejan todos los elementos para crear un espectáculo del Día de Muertos, el desfile. Eso se vuelve un espectáculo, cosa que la cultura mexicana no lo manejaba como espectáculo, no lo manejaba como show. Sí, era algo mucho más íntimo, mucho más propio. Y ahora se volvió un carnaval, cosa que es muy agradable, es muy bonito, es muy espectacular, como que en general la cultura americana. Sin embargo, no necesariamente es lo que nosotros teníamos, ¿no? Y ahí hay una mezcla que se está dando. Dentro de esta mezcla, que ahora nos cambian, luego presentan el Día de Muertos con Coco. Y ahí nos dan una lógica de por qué el Día de Muertos. El Día de Muertos es para no olvidarlos y que sigan vivos. No necesariamente era eso, no necesariamente así, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, ahí hay todo un juego, y la pregunta es qué tanto está esto dentro de una propuesta clara de posicionamiento ideológico político ante una respuesta política de Trump y ante la penetración o la nueva forma de manejar la propaganda política, ¿no?
Oh, thank you very much, because I wanted to hear more of the responses, and the coverage in the U.S. and people I talked to would only just say, oh, it was very well received and so forth. The background also, as you probably know, to Day of the Dead was that years before, and I'm not sure how long ago, a couple of years before the film came out, Coco, Disney announced that they were going to trademark copyright Day of the Dead. The idea, right? And it was outrageous. It was impossible. It was, I mean, you can add all kinds of other descriptions to it. It didn't work because there was enormous backlash. Like, what are you talking about? They have done similar kinds of things, by the way, and this is that notion of control. They want to control. So I think that in some ways gives some insights in a way to the film. Now, I'm the idea that it's a response to Trump is a new one for me. I'll have to think about that a little, but certainly Trump has not had a great relationship with Hollywood, and and then Iger very often is associated with the Democratic Party, not Republicans, and everything is very polarized these days, and so very well may be that. I'm very interested in hearing that it's added some, or tried to add some meanings that weren't in the tradition, because that's kind of what I expected might have happened. There were Latin Americans and specifically Mexican film creators involved with the film, and someone noted to me that they thought maybe that was why it was so well received here. I don't know, but I'm very interested as well in the influence of James Bond, because of course that's not Disney, right? So there are other influences that come from Hollywood, but aren't Disney. Certainly, the whole idea of influencing cultures. I mean, do we call that still cultural imperialism or cultural integration or multicultural? These are issues that I think are still, a lot of people are writing about this and dealing with this from cultural studies and so forth. So I'm not sure that I'm the best to explain or even talk about these kinds of issues. All I know is that I think that the Disney company specifically has adapted strategies that are assisting them in appealing to non-American cultures. For instance, Mulan. For instance, there are other examples. So in some way, and they're very explicit, Iger has been very deliberate in saying, this is in relationship to specifically the Shanghai theme park, is that we are working with the Chinese, we are not imposing, we are working with them, and we must do that, we just can't come in and impose our own ideas and so forth. That's what they say. So they're aware of this. And I think that they have developed a number of strategies to be able to be accepted, and they involve different strategies in different places, different films, and so forth. So again, it's that point about them adapting. And they've proven to be pretty adaptable. You pose some very interesting questions, but also some things to think about. Thank you.
¿Otra pregunta del público? ¿Otra? Bueno, simplemente comentar sobre este fenómeno que creo que tendríamos que mencionar, que la película Spectre de James Bond 007, que fue filmada en la Ciudad de México en el 2015. En esa película se puede ver un desfile de Día de Muertos, un parade, ¿no? Que es lo que mi compañero decía, un parade. Entonces, ese día de desfile, un parade, no existe asociado con la Día de Muertos. No existe. Okay. Entonces, al año siguiente, el gobierno de la Ciudad de México tomó algunos de los elementos de la película, utilería, y dijeron, vamos a hacer vamos a hacer realidad el rally, ¿no? De la película, y como algo, una atracción turística. Y resultó ser un gran éxito, resultó ser un fenómeno, resultó ser algo que atrajo a muchísimas personas y que entusiasmó a ciudadanos de la Ciudad de México y a turistas, ¿no?, nacionales. Y en los años siguientes ha crecido tanto que se ha vuelto como parte de los festejos asociados al Día de Muertos. Y Coco llegó en ese contexto. Entonces al segundo, tercer año de esto llegó Coco. Entonces teníamos el parade del Día de Muertos en la Ciudad de México, con mujeres y niños pintados, la cara pintada de blanco como Coco y los personajes de Coco. Y eso incluso en pequeños pueblos donde la tradición ha sido milenaria, con características indígenas, como en Michoacán, también se encontraron con una avalancha de personas, turistas del rostro pintado en blanco como Coco. Entonces hemos presenciado un sincretismo cultural, globalización, apropiación mediática, simbólica, muy interesante alrededor de este fenómeno. El otro aspecto que Jorge, nuestro compañero, comentaba, también es interesante en el sentido de que el otro asunto que mencionaste, el otro asunto, ¿cuál era?
Trump.
No. ¿La crueldad?
No, perdón, fue el hilo. Había otro aspecto importante que quería, sobre otra película.
No me acuerdo.
Bueno, lo sé.
A la tradición de muertos, sí.
No, sobre the copyright of Día de Muertos. Okay, hay una compañía de animación mexicana, Anima Films, que ha realizado ya 6 o 7 películas de animación. Y esa compañía solicitó el copyright aquí en México de la frase Día de Muertos y le fue negada, sobre el argumento de que es algo cultural, es un valor cultural, un bien intangible, etcétera, etcétera, etcétera. Al año siguiente, Disney Company lo solicita y se lo dan a Disney Company. Entonces eso generó una gran controversia en México y la administración, además un cambio político de administración coincidió con esa decisión y entonces se le negó ese trademark a la compañía Disney. Eso era lo que quería decir.
The other thing, though, to go back to your point about cruelty in Disney, it's a really interesting point that a lot of times there's the assumption that, well, for instance, by parents, I'll take my children to see a family movie, Disney, no violence, no cruelty. Yeah, it's not true. On the other hand, there are also those who argue that the stories, the original stories, fairy tales, folklore, by folklorists, they say, well, the original sometimes was even more violent, but it was for a reason. And there's different opinions on Disney's representation of violence and cruelty. Some say that they Disneyfy it, which they do, everything, and make it sweeter, nicer, a moral, and so forth. And then also there are those that say that it's not, sometimes not quite as violent as the original, but that was usually when it was in an oral version where people reading stories to their children and so forth. So there's differences, but certainly there is violence in Disney films, and it's the assumption that there isn't. I think that parents, I'm not so sure. They must see that when they take or show their children it. The other thing is my students say, well, that was an old film and it doesn't matter. They also say this for Snow White, for instance. Well, she was innocent and naive and she wasn't a strong woman, and so that doesn't matter. That was the 30s. Children still watch Snow White. Children still watch the old Disney, right? So it's still around and still influencing people, children. So just another point. Yeah.
Bueno, si no hay una pregunta más, concluiríamos esta sesión. Les agradecemos a todos su presencia y les invitamos a tomar un lunch para continuar luego con la segunda parte de nuestra jornada, donde hablaremos de la investigación en el seno de la Asociación Internacional para Estudios de la Comunicación y los Medios. Gracias.